Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining our concurrent session. We have a longish title, which essentially talks about what kind of educational and experiential learning opportunities we're giving students at the University of Dayton, explicitly at the intersection of science and human rights. So I'm Shelley Inglis. I'm the executive director of our Human Rights Center, and I'm very recent implant to Dayton. And when I got there, I found a lot of extraordinary work going on that enables quite a substantial amount of students that we have who are committed to issues of human rights and social justice, as well as learning about having academic experiences in and wanting to have vocations in scientific and engineering fields. So we're going to talk to you a little bit today about what we do and what we're learning from it and what we could do better. To start, I'm just going to briefly introduce our panel for you. And I have to get the bios up on my computer. If it'll come up. Okay, there it is. Okay, so far to my left is Kelly Bohr. Kelly is the Director of Community Relations for our School of Engineering and teaches community-based capstone course for our sustainability program. Kelly has over 20 years of experience working in and with higher education, community organizations, and metro parks, which is a large part of our environment in Ohio. She creates opportunities for connecting the community and the School of Engineering to co-create knowledge and collaboration. Kelly also designs experiences for students to engage their engineering mindset and skill set with community-driven projects to advance resilient and regenerative communities. Got some music going on. Kelly's graduate school research focused on ecology and wetland restoration, and her current scholarly work includes assessment of student learning and vocational development. So, welcome, Kelly. To my left right here is Rachel Carr. Rachel is a senior at the University of Dayton and majors in political science with minors in sustainability, engineering, and the environment, and English. Rachel centers her studies around the intersection of human rights and environmental concerns. She's an intern with UD's Human Rights Center, which we're very happy to have her, and she works on the Sustainable Development Goals. She participated in our center's project called Moral Courage, spending 2 weeks in El Paso collecting stories, and worked as an associate producer for our podcast, America the Borderland, which is a multimedia exhibit on migrant and refugee rights workers on our border. Rachel is a river steward through our Fitz Center for Leadership and Community, where she works on protecting our water resources through environmental education and community outreach. And then to her left is Mary Grace Moses. Mary Grace is a senior undergraduate student pursuing a major in environmental biology and a minor in sustainability, energy, and the environment. Within the biology department, she conducts research in an insect ecology lab on campus. She works for our Hanley Sustainability Institute on campus education and outreach. This past summer, she spent 9 weeks in Malawi conducting research with a local NGO determined to develop through our Human Rights Center research, a human rights-based practicum in Malawi. And Jared Marsh is a fourth-year human rights studies major. He's at the end, and he's the only male in our panel, so I didn't quite introduce him specifically, but I thought you'd know who he was. Former mechanical engineering major, He has experience in corporate sustainability, addressing pollution prevention at a healthcare organization, and promoting conscious living through sustainable initiatives centered around waste, ethical and sustainable purchasing, and community impact. He has research experience studying the impacts of climate change, government policy, and globalization on agriculture, and the effects of burning non-biodegradable waste. Most recently, Jared has focused on human-centered design and social innovation to overcome challenges of empathy gaps related to individual and group experiences. Jared currently works with us at the Human Rights Center, focusing on campus engagement and outreach, and I believe he spent some time in India.
Yes, I did.
As well.
I'll talk about that, yeah.
Okay, so this is our panel, and we're going to start by giving you a little bit of the pedagogical and experiential learning framework at the University of Dayton, which is pretty explicit, and Kelly is going to do that for us, setting up how we think about providing this kind of experience for students at our university.
Great. Thank you. Hi, everyone. So at the University of Dayton, we take experiential learning pretty seriously because it is an opportunity for so many different benefits for students, but also when we get specifically more into community-engaged learning aspects of experiential learning, it has great benefits for how we partner with our community as well, and teaching students invaluable lessons. So at the University of Dayton, we approach experiential learning from a couple of different ways. One would be vocational development. Another would be the development of empathy and cultural skills, such as cultural humility. And then we also look at how do we help students take ownership and have their own agency to work with others to solve complex problems in our world. Whereas experiential learning, I'm sure across the U.S. and institutions, experiential learning is a big thing, and many, many people are doing that. We're actually looking at ways that we can cross the boundaries and silos of academic disciplines. So, for example, the science and human rights. How can we have students be in those spaces and have experiences that actually make them cross those boundaries and take them out of just the silo? We also look at experiential learning as our opportunity to educate for the common good. So the University of Dayton loves to say that we are the university for the common good. And we do that explicitly in light of our Catholic and Marianist tradition at the University of Dayton, which is very community-driven. So first and foremost, we are concerned about partnerships over projects. So when we start talking about community-engaged learning as a sense of experiential learning, we're going to focus on partnerships first, more so than projects. And partnerships meaning that right relationships with people, where people's human dignity is upheld, where we don't necessarily need to be the expert and the leader in the community. Instead, we look for where are the experts in the community, experts of their own knowledge and wisdom and experience, and where in the community are the leaders, and how do we work with them in their way, and how they have identified their needs and their desires. And so that's a really important piece to the way that we partner for experiential learning opportunities for students. We do have an institutional learning goal around practical wisdom. So that is another part of where we frame experiential learning, is looking at how are we building practical wisdom for students. So how are we giving them opportunities to act from moral traditions and think about ethical situations, build empathy, and then to take that wisdom, work with teams and collaborate to find solutions and alternate solutions, and knowing the impact of those solutions. So that's also a large part of our experiential learning. And I think you'll see all sorts of pieces of that and the impact of that here in just a minute with the stories from our students.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. And so this is sort of an academic approach where a lot of this is integrated into an actual classroom experience. Then it is an experiential learning experience that's outside of the classroom, and it's usually connected to an institution or a center, an institute within the university. So it's sort of combined both academic and experiential experience. So I want to turn now starting with you, I think, Rachel, on what your experience has been. Describe how it has helped you think about issues and work on issues at the intersection of human rights and science.
Sure, thank you. And just as a reminder, I worked on the Human Rights Storytelling Project, the Moral Courage Project, and our more environmentally driven River Stewards program. And just first responding to your description of partnerships first, the experience of working through River Stewards has kind of asked me to combine different frameworks. So before you go into the community through a partnership, you learn methods of entering a community. And so we have our 5 principles of entering a community, and it's looking at assets first, looking at how do you interview and all of those things. But once you start working with the community, how do you, a question that arose for me was, how do I reconcile the framework we bring with the value frameworks of the neighborhood you're working with, their mission statement with yours? And that was kind of my first experience of not only working at the intersection of science as we're going in to protect and natural resources and trying to see how we can bring communities together to do that. But each of these communities has their own priorities. So seeing how different interdisciplinary tools could help to do that was my first kind of push to look in that broader way. But then when it came to the practical work of working on the Moral Courage Project or an interview, you're just asked to do it all at the same time. It's not a space to work as a scientist and then as a journalist and then as something else. It's do them all at once, and I think that's the value of the intersection approach, because we're not coming from silos. By definition, undergraduate students are novices, and the asset we bring is our relationship with each other and learning to work and learn from each other as we enter these spaces rather than on a discipline, I think really allows us to thrive at that intersection right now.
Great. Mary Grace?
So, excuse me, going off a lot of what Rachel said, for me, when I applied and got accepted into the Malawi Research Practicum, before I spent the 9 weeks on the ground in Malawi, I was enrolled in a pre-departure course. And all the classes I had taken had been science, and they've been ecology and chemistry. So then I was in this political science course to try to learn the things I had been completely lacking in my discipline. And we learned so much about so many things that I didn't know about, and I got very overwhelmed, quite frankly, because I thought I shouldn't be here. This is social science research. I thought this was exactly what I wanted to do, but I felt like I didn't belong there. And as soon as we got to Malawi and we started doing our research, I started to realize that the school had given me everything I needed. Between the political science course and even the chemistry and the biology and physics, all of those courses were preparing me to be a scientist doing social science research. And I had questioned for so long if I didn't want to do research and work in a lab, so I never knew what my degree was going to get me. And I was worried I was in the wrong place because I wanted to work with people. And in the classroom, it wasn't presented in that way, that everything we were learning could be in collaboration with an NGO. It can go towards human rights-based work or development. And I think I saw that once I got there, also because I was meeting with people and interviewing people that never saw a difference between gender studies and biology and economics, because everyone that I was interviewing and everyone, they understand that those are all related to each other. They would think we were fools for thinking it ever wasn't related. And it was through the on-the-ground experience that I felt like I was thrown into. And I had to do that all on my own. And I think that's one of the best things about the experiential learning opportunities, is that while we're given the tools, everything else is on our own, because you can't teach someone in a classroom how they'll react to a new environment. And with conducting research, there's only so many simulations and studies to provide you, to prepare you for that. So,
Great. Jared, do you want to add from your
Yes, I'll
perspective?
just add a little bit. Can everyone hear me all right? Yes, okay. I'm actually going to just take this up here. So I think to what Kelly had touched on, the approach UD takes to experiential learning really enables students to engage in this type of work. And I think to Mary Grace's point about questioning your ability is prevalent throughout not only just UD, but every institution, thinking about how we're engaging students in experiential learning. And so by enabling students to participate in these kind of programs gives them the opportunity to build up their experience, to give them the capacity to engage in this work so that we can become, we're working towards becoming professionals that are able to then go on and do the work that we've heard throughout this entire presentation, or throughout this entire conference. So like for me personally, thinking about the value that experiential learning has had in my experience at UD is engaging with programs like a pollution prevention program, where you're working with healthcare systems to consider what is the level of pollution that you're producing in your communities, and then take steps to mitigate that pollution. And it's not just a resume builder where I'm able to put down on my resume that we were able to save this amount of money, this many tons of carbon dioxide, and then also provide this many meals, but also you're providing value to that institution. TriHealth is a healthcare organization in Cincinnati where they're continuing to do the work that I had gone there and done, and able to get grants from that. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship. And as Shelley had mentioned, participating in a program in India where you're researching and working with communities about how climate crisis is impacting them, how globalization, government policy is impacting agriculture. And had we not had the opportunity to engage in these experiential learning, then I wouldn't have been able to have these experiences and translate education in the classroom to education then that applies to the field.
So, Kelly, do you want to say something about ethos engineering type experiences at this point?
Sure. So I, in the School of Engineering, I also work with our Ethos Center, and our Ethos Center has been around for about 18 years. And our center, one of the main goals of our center is for students to be able to take immersions at any point during the academic year or summer, anywhere in the world. So we have some local partners that we partner with, as well as domestic and international. And our goal with that is for engineers to see way beyond just their discipline and just what they're being trained to do, or that ideal job that a mechanical engineer should get. So even if they are going that way, how do we develop engineers to think about systems and the complexities and ambiguity that's actually in the world? So how do we get the engineer that might be with one of those companies that they were talking about earlier to actually say, whoa, 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 this is not okay. There is human impact here, and to be aware of that and not just charge forward. So our students, our Ethos Center is really built also, like everybody else is sharing, on that sense of partnerships rather than projects. So we always work with on-the-ground community organizations who are familiar with the local community and familiar with the project that the engineering students are working on. Plus, we have the academic support that goes along with it. So students do get academic credit through reflecting on their experience and incorporating aspects of human rights, appropriate technology, human-centered design thinking, and all of that is incorporated into that academic support. But they also get that support from the academics on the project itself, so that we're not trying to assume or say to our community partners that our students are experts, but that they can bring an engineering mindset and are the perfect engineers to shape now, because there are engineers for the future.
So just to be clear, when we say academic, we mean that students enroll in courses that prepare them for experiential learning, and those courses give them particular skills and knowledge base, research, and academic frameworks around doing the work they're going to do. So in the case of Ethos, anybody who wants to engage in experiential learning and engineering has to take a full class before doing that. Same with Moral Courage, and the same with Malawi Practicum. We don't send students out without giving them a whole semester of understanding it. In the case of Malawi, it's of course rights-based development, working in a global and overseas context and preparing to be engaged at that level. In the case of Moral Courage, it's about documenting agency of human rights defenders on various issues in the US. So when we say academic, I wanted to explain that there is full preparation for these experiences. But we did call this panel transformative, and so I want to give the students an opportunity, I know it's a trendy word right now, but to really talk about what has changed for them and how they view themselves or this work, this intersection of science and human rights, or their future work differently because of these experiences at University of Dayton. Jared, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. So in the bio, as Shelley had mentioned, I was mechanical engineering for 2.5 years, and coming into school, you know, as many people do, I was like, oh, I don't really know what I want to do. I think engineering would be good. You know, my dad said, oh, engineering's a blossoming field. You know, you'll have a secure job, be able to travel, you know, make good money, and, you know, do that. And I was like, oh, okay, sounds good to me. And went through it and really did have a knack and love for the technical, you know, math and science. But I was going through that and realizing this isn't necessarily what I want to do the rest of my life. And being able to come to that realization through the experiential learning and through these experiences. And so participating in programs like the pollution prevention program in the India agroecology climate crisis, being able to participate in those programs helped me to realize what it was, or not realize fully what I wanted to do, but start guiding me in that direction. So had a change of major of coming back after the India program and changed my major to human rights studies. And while I don't think I'm fully quite there yet in realizing what I want to do, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but it allowed me to realize what I did not want to do, but made me understand that, oh, I value the intersection of science and human rights, you know, of environmental and social justice because of having had these experiences. And I think a common theme we've heard throughout this entire conference is like providing value to community engagement through community local-based knowledge, and having had experiences to get that opportunity to experience that firsthand while still being an undergrad has been really transformative for me, because I'm able to relate then to what people are talking about as they're sitting up here. It's the exposure culturally to these different experiences, but then also through education and talking about, again, how are we translating education in the classroom to the real world? And it's going back to how we're enabling students to do that. And so it starts from institutional level by providing these opportunities to students that then allows those students to have the transformative experiences in their own personal life that I've had. And will hopefully UD will continue to provide, and you know, there's no reason they would not, to students, because they do have a really big impact in our personal lives and in the future.
Great. Mary Grace, you want to pick up?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing for me, I know I talked about how I didn't think science, or I didn't understand how science fit into human rights, and I did in my experiences in Malawi, but then I came back and realized that my classes and my work, everything was in the same place that I left it in. And I had these different views and different values, and I didn't know what I was gonna do with that, because if I had left that experiential learning opportunity and did everything the same, then it wasn't worth it. I shouldn't have gone if I wasn't gonna change anything that I was doing. So my work at the Hanley Sustainability Institute has been on education and outreach. So a large part of that is simply educating thousands of students each academic year. And before that, when Jared was working there for a while, he started these programs that were incorporating more human rights issues in dialogues. So then I had been taking that over this year, and I knew that because of those experiences, I had to push that more. And that in conversations and in presentations, I didn't want students walking away from sustainability education continuing to think it was only about composting or saving the plants or the bees or anything like that, because that is what is thought of even sustainability, which is supposed to be interdisciplinary. And through those programs, I've been able to, with the volunteers that I lead, be more of advocates that are coming from very different backgrounds. And a large part of that I've seen is students see both sides of it. They see the social justice issues and they see the environmental issues, but that bridge is missing. And just explaining it to the students through personal experiences that I had in Malawi has helped to change their mindsets, but also they just simply never knew. And I think if all students capitalized on these opportunities in experiential learning, they would see these intersections. A lot of it is just not seen in the academics. And then one other point I wanted to make off of what Rachel was saying earlier is, especially as undergrads, none of us are experts in anything. We don't even have a degree yet. And I think that provides us, like Rachel was saying, with a special, we can play a special role in working with partners on campus, such as dining services or facilities management, is in those projects and projects I've been able to do at my work at the Sustainability Institute. I've been able to act as someone that can bring in friends that are studying political science or human rights, and we can make those partnerships at an undergraduate level to bring in all the different centers and institutes on campus that are focused on their projects within their institutes and don't necessarily some don't have the time per se to think about who they could be working with, and they don't see those odd partnerships that a lot of us can see.
Rachel?
I think thinking about that idea of being a novice, and I think experiential learning asks you to reconsider what interdisciplinary looks like, because if you're working outside of your own discipline, that means you're entering a space where, like, everybody has this week, you're either apologizing for not knowing enough about human rights or not knowing enough about science. And so I think experiential learning asks you to look forward to that apology in a way and be excited about being a novice in a space, and invites you to go into those. And then just thinking about that space itself. This is UD's a liberal arts school, so you're getting that kind of well-rounded education, but the place to kind of bring it all together doesn't exist outside of these programs. So I think I've just really been challenged to bring it all together in those spaces, and then looking at the way it's transformative for the way that we engage the community. I think reciprocity is something that has challenged me in a kind of research setting. So when we go into the communities in El Paso and ask organizers to invest their time in telling us their story, that's a big ask at this time, and to make sure that whatever product we're producing as an exhibit or a podcast, that's a product that's going to be valuable to them. So even in documenting, how do we document in a way that's valuable to the partners beyond even getting a project on the ground or anything like that? So I think for me, the transformative part is in the way I look at my education, where it can move.
Great. So we are obviously learning as we're doing this at the university, and we have lots of challenges and failures. So now I'm going to turn in the end before I ask you all to contribute. And I know we have some other universities in Ohio here that are engaged in thinking about these issues well, and I'd love to hear from them. But we do have a lot of issues. So this is not just about saying how great the University of Dayton is. It's really about a journey to move to getting this kind of education much more mainstream. And so now I'm going to ask Kelly to talk a little bit about our challenges, and some of the students can really then come in with their critiques as well. Kelly?
Sure. So we have absolutely no challenges. Yeah. As it goes, we do have challenges, and I think about them in several different ways. There's challenges on the process, but there's also challenges in the programmatic support, as well as student engagement. So part of the process, maybe student engagement challenges, are that we are at a primarily middle to upper class white institution. That's the majority of our students. So obviously that means that diversity is a challenge throughout the university in so many different ways, and equity is a challenge too. We are a private institution. We all know the cost of higher education right now. So equity, access, inclusion is a really big challenge for us. How do we make these experiences equitable? And not only that, how are we talking about the experience? How are we sharing that experience? And how are we bringing students to the experience that actually make it accessible in the sense of, I feel like I can belong in that experience. I feel that I will be welcomed among the other students. I feel that I will be comfortable with that community partner in XYZ organization, and that the same values that we have at the University of Dayton around inclusion and respect and human dignity of all identities, that will be upheld also at our community partners. So that continues to be a challenge for us, is how do we work through that? And we have been collaborating across campus and with many different entities of our partners to work on those challenges. But I think it's going to be a long-term challenge. Another challenge for us is just in program support. So these types of experiential learning experiences are not really cheap for anyone. That's also a constant battle. We know that it provides great benefits for many, not just for students, but there is a limitation to how many students we can include in these types of experiences. And if we're being especially in tune to equity, that means we are potentially even having to reduce the number of students involved in the experiences because of that as well. So I think scaling up these experiences is a challenge when it comes to that type of consideration. And then last but not least, assessment, the big ugly A word in the higher education circles of experiential learning, especially with community engaged learning, because we're not just talking about assessment of student learning, we're talking about assessment of community goals. So ultimately, when we do engagement with community, our learning goals are essentially also our community goals, and so we encourage co-creation of them together. And how do you assess that? So there's outputs, outcome, and impact. I think outputs are relatively easy to assess because you can count how many students, how many people they interacted with. You can share those numbers. I think what's harder is the outputs and then the impact, which is the long term. How are our alumni responding this 10 years out? How has it changed their lives? And 10 years out, is it sustainable in those communities? Has the project brought any impact to them? Has it been valuable to them? So that's why we also try to keep up our long-term partnerships, but there's a lot of work to be done on the assessment.
Yeah. And just to add, what is the assessment on that we're saying we're reaching these goals for students? What is our assessment of the changes in agency and empathy and perspective of students? While we hear narratives, we don't have tools to really, and we're an academic institution, so it should be rigorously be able to say that students really do have a transformative experience in terms of their levels of agency, their levels of empathy, and their levels of knowledge. So those are also dimensions of the assessment where we struggle. I want to give it to the students to sort of give their critiques, where are our challenges and lessons learned, and then over to you, again, encouraging you to engage with us actually with your experiences. We're keen to learn and have an interaction. Mary Grace?
So part of what we've talked about is how being an undergraduate, we are able to do a little bit of everything in a university. I've been a little bit of a scientist, or a little bit of community-based development, or some human rights advocacy, but I'm not a specialist in anything. But as all three of us are getting ready to graduate, that is something we're all being pressured to think about. What do we want a master's in? What exactly do we want to be in? So as a scientist, will I be a hydrologist or anything like that? And there's such a push for that. And I think that's such a challenge, because then once you start to get into those fields, it is easy to block everything else out. And once you get really focused in one area, especially in the sciences, to just get lost in the lab and be doing research and getting samples sent in from all these places you've never been to that are impacting these people. You might not even know their stories. And while you can't meet every single person that your research impacts, I think a lot of the time, scientists especially, and in science courses, we see that where the humanity is lost and people aren't thinking about the incredible impact their research could make if applied in different areas. And if their research is hidden in different journals that human rights-based workers aren't looking at, how is that knowledge going to be spread? So I think one of those challenges is, while in the classroom, there isn't a lot of room for application, the application has to be, it's on all of us, and every scientist or whoever, it's on us to take whatever we're doing, because we are being pushed to be specialists, and find out where those other disciplines are that you can work with. And I think because of experiential learning, because of my experience in Malawi, I've realized that if I keep on the track of being a scientist and doing research, I have to always make sure that my research is impacting humans, or looking for that specifically. And to one other point, I just wanted to say that I think some of the, with moving forward, that just kind of like I said, I just want to encourage everyone. And I know, again, coming from an undergraduate, I'm not an expert in anything, but these issues are so real, and it is so easy to fall into one area, to just think about where your work can be applied in areas that you might never think of.
All right. Jared? How did your dad take the switch to human rights studies?
He jokingly, we were in a phone conversation, he jokingly said, "Oh, so you want to be poor the rest of your life?" And, but I told him, I was like, as long as I'm doing what, makes me happy and what I love, then I'll be right in. It was a joke, but yeah. So, but I think UD, has given me the support that I need to be able to, make those transitions, and give me the confidence to be able to say, human rights studies is a very new field in higher education. UD had the first human rights studies program with a minor in 2008, so that's, 11 years ago. That's very new, and as undergraduate, that can make you very uneasy about what that might mean for your future. But through all these opportunities, it has continued to reinforce, my belief in why I'm doing this work, and what the impact is going to be in the future. I want to apologize. I'm going to go back a little bit to the transformation on education advocacy. Something Mary Grace had said reminded me of something I wanted to say, talk about how experiential learning doesn't need to just happen overseas. It doesn't need to just happen in internships and co-ops. You don't need to travel to do that. I think something that UD does very well is experiential learning on campus and through campus jobs, like at the Human Rights Center, at the Hanley Sustainability Institute, where we have all worked, and being able to uplift other students using our experiences. And so, we're talking about the trickle-down effect, and this is actually going to other, unlike, trickle-down economics, this is actually having an impact to the students. So, all three of us were able to organize and host a climate strike as part of the Strike for Fridays. And so we're able to take our experiences that are giving us the foundation to build advocacy amongst us, each other, and other students. And so you can see from all the pictures how that's formulated in our work. And so the experiential learning on campus has been a really big impact for me, and then also in other students, and how we're able to translate that. Thinking specifically about challenges, I won't touch on silos, because I think Mary Grace did a really wonderful job covering that. I think I want to start with talking about norms and how recognizing, the fact that I'm up here speaking to all and have had these opportunities is, through a certain level of privilege, and what that means, as someone who's engaging in human rights work. And so, it's a really important, a challenge that, as Kelly had mentioned, on diversity and equity at UD, but then what that translation looks like, as our students are engaging in, the quote-unquote real world. And so UD has done a great job on educating us, what it means to be, someone who's coming from, middle class and upper middle class background, and then going into, communities and participating in this kind of work, and how that might be perceived, and what you have to be conscious of as you're participating in this work. And we don't want to perpetuate any white savior complexities, whether that's abroad or here domestically. And so it's really important to educate all of us and students, because oftentimes I think we've all heard those worst case scenarios where someone goes in with really good intentions and then it just blows up because they weren't putting the community first. So UD faces challenges like that, but does a really good job about educating what that means, and talking about like the value of community. And so community is a buzzword around UD. We all are smiling about that, but recognizing how there's inherent value in community engagement, and again, going back to how you value community, and not just, this isn't something you're putting on your resume, this is something that is going to help you professionally and in the future, but also you're creating those partnerships that are hopefully going to be sustained as well. And one of the challenge I've experienced in this work is that, like, for me, and I think all three of us as students, we're able to recognize the intersection between science and human rights, without batting an eye, because it seems so real, but we've found is, like, in the silos, that many people also are not able to recognize that intersection. And so we're really trying to work on how do we frame this message, and how you're communicating your stories, and thinking from the start of experiential learning to then as you're working through all this. So talking about how do you communicate all the experiences that you've had, and how that has been an intersection of science and human rights, and how you have had value in those experiences, and not just participating in a program that occurs every few months or so, but thinking about what the value has been, not only on yourselves but also the other people.
Great, thanks. So Rachel, you're going to be last but not least, and then over to you all.
Just thinking about one specific critique for the programs I've participated in. River Stewards is a 3-year program, but even in that, I haven't really seen a healthy balance between student and each cohort's agency and long-term community impact view. So this program, it's 3 years. The first 2 years are just getting to know community partners. So once a week for 2 or 3 hours, we're meeting with community partners and different organizations. And I think it really emphasizes that part, but then it really emphasizes that you as a cohort will respond to what you've heard over the past 2 years and take up a project with one specific organization. And that's your last year. And you don't get to, you're not there anymore once it's implemented, and you're not there to measure the impact. And so how do you balance students having agency to go out in a community like that and being a responsible actor in those spaces? And I think as a method, we've emphasized listening, but we haven't emphasized learning how to measure your impact and look at how appropriate that was. And so just as a general question, I don't know if it's really even appropriate for us to be taking up a project if we're going to be leaving in the year, and what is 4 years? Not much in that scale.
Great. But it is, sure.
Okay, thank you. So something that Rachel said and Jared both talking about the challenges within specific programs, I think one of the biggest challenges with the Malawi practicum was that we spent 9 weeks doing community-based development, and the framework was great, and it really set us up to not go in a community and pretend like we knew what we were doing and cause harm. But then when we come back, we go to conferences, we have poster presentations, and we're talking about our experiences, and it seems that all 5 of us in our cohort, all 5 of us just talk about our research. And we no longer talk about the communities. And I just feel like there's something missing, and I never feel like I'm doing the community justice by only talking about my research, the research and the data I collected, when the whole time I had a research partner who went everywhere with me, who lives in Malawi. And I think with presenting data and talking about those experiences, even though the community was at the center of everything we were doing, as soon as we got here, yes, they were instrumental in the data collected, but it seems like they're not talked about anymore and that their stories are lost. And I feel like there should be more storytelling in the research practicum that I did because those stories are so instrumental. So, thank you.
Great. And the research goes back to the local NGO that uses it, but we've not been, it's a challenge for us to incorporate that full cycle. So that's our story. We'd love to hear from you. Yeah, you can go on up to the mic, please, and we can take a few comments before reverting to the panel, since we've spoken a lot. If there are other comments, please feel free.
Hi, so I'm from Case Western, and I really appreciate hearing more Ohio universities being involved in the human rights sphere. But given the changing landscape in Dayton and even the last 20 years, there's a lot of challenges in that community as a whole. And you talk a lot about community building and community partners, and you have a really great established projects worldwide, but I really want to hear more about the communities, the actual community that you are involved in beyond just campus, because Dayton has been facing a lot of challenges with factories closing and the opioid crisis and that random KKK rally a couple of months ago that just happened out there. So I really want to know how you're partnering with the people on the ground in Dayton, because that's where you are and that is your community.
Yeah. Not to mention, we had, if you all heard, a mass shooting the evening right after the El Paso shooting in Dayton, and we had a trifecta of tornadoes a month and a half before that hit the community at once. We'll take some more, before we respond to you, we'll take some more comments so we can.
Very inspiring to hear the presentations and the work that you're doing. Challenges that you're facing, I'll just say it is adversity that is the source of innovation. And I'd like to think that these kind of projects are sort of a natural evolution in humanity to deal with the challenges that we are facing. And during the course of the presentation, I remember thinking, oh, I wish, I was an undergrad back in the late 90s. If I had it to do all over again, knowing what I know now, I would have chosen a program like this. Because it was only through my experience, starting off pre-med and then changing to political science and sociology, and being a first-generation American-born immigrant, you can imagine how my parents took it. But I knew I wanted to do something I could be passionate about, and so I ended up going the law track and doing human rights work. But it was actually only during my current PhD research that I have come to realize the value of the natural sciences in human rights work, because I was trying to reconcile business, human rights, and international law. And trying to do so within the social science framework, it wasn't answering the question, and so drawing in those natural sciences definitely helped. And I realized, I wish I knew those things early on. It might have saved me a lot of time, but now I can identify with what you're saying much more. I think also I want to point out how lucky you are to have this kind of mindset going on in your life, because you're going to be able to see yourself within a system. And a lot of people don't do that because we go through this hyper-specialized track and forget how interconnected we are. And so definitely take advantage of that. The issue with regard to what is it that you're going to actually do, I would suggest focusing on what problems you want to solve, knowing that no matter what it is that you are doing, you can find a way to solve those problems. It just focus on where your strengths are and identify where you fit in within that system to connect to the bigger problem that you want to solve. A lot of the issues that we face is we don't start in this process with an understanding of a problem we want to solve. And so you having this experience is very useful. And the last bit, maybe a little bit of advice to measure. It is these students and their futures and the feedback that they can give you in their engagement in things other than their specialization could be a mechanism to sort of reinforce the value of going in with this complex systems thinking. I mean, the mentioning of words like humanity and morals and complexity, these are things that, and wisdom. Wisdom is so important, and these are words that we do not get enough of and understand as we go through, at least from my experience. So the fact that you're getting it now is invaluable. So I commend you on your efforts, and I look forward to seeing good things from you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Hi. I'm sorry to have missed the first part of your presentation, but I enjoyed what I heard so far. And I'm speaking as someone who teaches at a Catholic university as well. And I also get the sense that you come from an engineering background, so I don't know the extent to which you'll be able to respond to this. But we know that abortion and reproductive rights are also human rights. Mm-hmm. And we also know, and we're going to hear about it on, I think, the last presentation, about how science is a human right. Yeah. I know at my Catholic university, Fordham, I have a lot of positive things to say about it, but sometimes it's a challenge to do organizing around the rights and dignity of pregnant and parenting people. Not only the single right to abortion, but the right to parent with dignity. And I'm wondering, how do you navigate that? So we can kind of be pro-human rights, we can be pro-science, but how do we navigate, or what are some of the things that you've observed or kind of picked up with regard to navigating that, where religion and the power of religion in influencing and shaping these debates, often without that all-important respect for science?
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Bill Leonard from Case Western Reserve University. It's very encouraging to see a program like this taking off, and I have some, I guess, administrative level questions and then some other comments. Is related to the engineering ethos program. What kind of feedback do you get from your ABET accreditors on that program, and how does that feed into the university's thinking on it? And then I guess what career paths do your students from this ethos program take? What kind of jobs are they going to? What's your retention in engineering? So I know Jared changed majors. How common is that? That would be interesting to know. What's the impact of the discontinuity with students changing on these projects? And then I guess my comment suggestions would be teaching students the importance of information dissemination and how human rights organizations and activists find information. So for example, what are the type of keywords they search when they do a Google search? And you can use those keywords in your articles, your journal articles, anything you publish. And then I guess a lot of the comments from your students were about community organizing. So it's like you're organizers in this community, but you're not talking about it like you're a community organizer. You're talking about it like you're a student in a community and you're trying to build that community. But I guess community organizing is a very specific thing. And I always call back to Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. I don't know how much you integrate that into your program or have your students read that before they go out to kind of
Great point.
make sure they're not putting their voice in it, but they're using their position to bring up the voice of others.
Did you read that? Great. Another. Thank you.
Do you want one more, or do you want to respond first?
No. I think it'd be great to, because it's nice to hear from you all and less from us. So please.
All right. So we all know institutional change is hard. It's really hard. And so I applaud you for going down this path. And I think we all know that what you're doing is the right thing to do. But I'm wondering, in terms of the actual process of change within the institution, how many people were like the true believers in your project? How many people did you feel you needed to get on board in terms of getting the literature in front of them about cross-disciplinary and interdisciplinary learning, experiential learning. Basically, how did you build up the right core? And do you think you've done that? Do you think that you have that sustainability, or do you think that this is something where at some point you're few and proud are going to get burnt out? So I'm just curious, because I'm also going through a big institutional change thing, and we're starting to hit that few and proud burning out. So I'm curious your thoughts.
Thanks so much. One more, thank you.
I'm Aramati Casper. I'm a research associate at Colorado State University, and I have a question kind of that goes beyond the bounds of your presentation, but relates to some of the other ones. And the challenge of, it's like, well, there are only a certain number of students that can do this. So I'm on a research project that's working on integrating diversity, equity, and inclusion curriculum directly into engineering, undergraduate curriculum, and looking at how do we actually have them, instead of just doing like, calculate these random numbers for a hypothetical problem, how can we change those problems so they actually make students understand, like, you need to look beyond like the ideal man. You need to think about the social context. You need to understand that there's no such thing as being unbiased. So think about your biases. And so I'm wondering if you have spillover into the rest of your curriculum, and if so, what that looks like.
Sure. Great. Are we done with questions? Oh, one more. Great, please.
My name is Nitya Sanbut, and maybe it's a comment more than just a question. So I just wanted to say how much inspired I am to see such a, the level of intelligence and professionalism and passion in your students. I saw you guys yesterday at the NMAP, design thinking, and I knew that you are undergrad student, but every time I see you talk, I see you present, I see you act, I just like, okay, there are like PhD students. And I did have a question about equity, access for, people of colors or minorities, and I'm so happy to hear you address that. And I think sometimes it's, I went to school where in the US, I did my, born and raised in Thailand and came here for, improve my English and went to a grad school level where the majority of students were from developing countries. So I'm so glad that that's where you're heading, because there's a lot of people that have a lot of ideas and things that they wanted to do for their communities, but they don't have access to that kind of platform. So hopefully, you will be able to find more funding to provide students with scholarships that would allow these, more students. So hopefully, if there's any funders that would like to fund those, because I think, I just think that, it's important because like someone like three of you guys, you are going to do such amazing thing in the world with the mindset that you have. But it's not enough, we have more people that have that mindset to have access to such opportunities. So thank you so much for addressing that in a very, very honest way. And I also just wanted to say that I also don't have any expertise. When I was graduating, someone asked me what I would, do. I'm like, what I do will define who I am, right? Because I'm not gonna become like a scientist. I'm not going to become. So I think you guys will do such amazing work. So sometimes it's just where you are going to land, it's going to define what you will become, But having that holistic approach to everything you do, it's important. So thank you so much. I admire you guys so much. If I ever decide to go back to school, I feel like University of Dayton will be one of my priorities to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay, so Kelly, do you want to start? I think I can pick up some of the questions too, and also the students, but why don't you start from the ones that you feel comfortable answering?
Yeah. So I probably could speak something to all of them, but maybe I'll just try to hit a few. Thank you also. A couple of you reiterated that importance around diversity and equity and access. We have to keep working hard at that. We have to stay at the table with that. We're very fortunate at the University of Dayton. The past 2 or 3 years, we've hired a VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and they've been hiring more and more staff. And they have gone through a huge strategic planning process and have just rolled out the plan and are very intent on working on these issues at all levels of the university. And they are fantastic to work with. So I have been very involved with both how do we do that curriculum for students, but also how we do it with faculty and staff. And that includes everything from examining white privilege to looking at how do we truly, I think it was Jared that mentioned that we all use the word community at UD. We have a lot of students that think community means drinking beer in the neighborhood. So how do we redefine their assumptions and biases around that is a huge piece of work we're working on. And so thank you for everybody bringing that up. And a note about that, so in the engineering school, we actually have an office that is a minorities and engineering center who are specifically bringing in diversity, inclusion, equity curriculum into engineering. It is in our seminars throughout the 4 years. It's being built into the first year design class because they want to do some community-based projects, and I told them there was no way they could do that without first talking to the students about these things. So they are integrating that. And then obviously through the Ethos Center program, if students are choosing to do our program, they are getting that curriculum before working with communities. The other piece too was the process of change. I think maybe Shelley could speak to that one a little bit as well, but yes, people at our university get burnt out, and there have been groups who have been the hoorah groups, and fortunately, I believe it's building for sustainability, for human rights, and for experiential learning, where it traditionally has been. So I've been at the institution working on curriculum and with faculty and staff for 20 years, and I finally see some momentum on what we tried to get going 20 years ago. There is some momentum now. And the original advocates, many of them have retired, but they're still staying at the table. It's not as infiltrated as I would like to see, because I think the administration liked the talk, but they don't quite understand the walk and how challenging it is and how time-consuming it is, or how much money we need. So, and then the last thing maybe I'll say is around, I'm looking at the notes that I wrote down. The local Dayton work, I think that really speaks to me, because that's actually where my heart and soul is the local. So I was an environmental biologist, and I was teaching environmental biology and working in curriculum in the biology department as the first part of my career. And I knew there could be more. I just believed it in my heart that there could be more than just educating students to be environmental biologists. And so I actually applied for a grant to work with a local community partner who happens to be part of the Metro Parks that is after-school program for some of our Dayton schools, and they have a watershed. They have a river that runs right in their backyard, and nobody was really caring about that water quality, and it was pretty trashed. So we actually worked with the community partner and with young children, middle school age, at that community partner with my students, and we all learned together how to assess our river and how to do a watershed assessment. And then we actually worked together, the students and the middle schoolers, to have an evening with city commissioners and other local politicians on what they found out about the water. And that not only, I think, significantly changed some of the students in that course, it significantly changed my pathway. And that's when I started going more into social justice and local community efforts. So my position in the School of Engineering is a brand new position. It just came about last year. The Ethos Center has been primarily focused on international work, and they decided that it was just as important to work locally and domestically. So I was actually brought on to the School of Engineering to increase local partnerships and to work on local community work and to involve students in that work. So what has been great is we thought only a few engineering students would choose working with the local community over the very sexy Hollywood international work. Actually, we've had a significant number of engineering students want to do work with our partners right in Dayton, and it's been fantastic. And so many of them have already shared with me, they're like, we don't get why we would ever leave this community. We feel a part of it, and we want to be a part of the communities that we have met. So.
Okay. So I will take at the end, I'll build off that a little bit on the Dayton community part that is maybe a little more around the issues that you might be thinking about, and on the reproductive rights question. But I want to let the students, and I also want to recognize that we only have 5 minutes more. So I don't know if you guys want to stay and allow us to finish, or whether you want to leave in 5 minutes. Oh, they are? Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, so we got lots of time. Okay, students, over to you.
If you don't mind, I'm just going off your background, Kelly. Before you were with Ethos, you were with the Fitz Center, which from at least the story of the university that the students get is kind of an explanation both of like where we are institutionally and where we are locally. So Brother Fitz was a former president of the university, and he really emphasized local service. And so he established, or in his memory, was established the Fitz Center for Leadership and Community, and so that's always locally based work. The River Stewards is one of their programs, so all of our work is done within our watershed, so defining local as the areas in which we share water resources. And that kind of institutional history, that is a center founded around the practice principles from a Marianist tradition. So from my student perspective, the biggest push is how do we kind of reconcile new frameworks like the SDGs with our older frameworks such as the Marianist principles. So it seems like there is support, but it hasn't, this long-term support hasn't always used the same language.
Yeah, so here we're talking, just to clarify, we have a Fitz Center for Community Leadership, we have a Sustainability Institute, we have a Human Rights Center, and we have an Ethos Center. We're actually talking about programs that go across these various parts of the institution. So it's not one program. And they come at these issues from a slightly different perspective, but we are more and more working in collaboration and more making our approaches consistent to, sort of conform to principles of reciprocal community-based work and learning, whether it's global, whether it's national, or whether it's within Dayton or on our campus.
Yeah, I just want to add really quickly, we also have a Center for Social Concern that falls within campus ministry. So that also gets that religious part of this work as well, and they have been instrumental in some of the work that we're doing. Another framework, I'm just going to throw another framework we're looking at that you might be interested in. It is focused on human rights and looking at responsible interaction between higher education and communities. It's called Fair Trade Learning. So it's Eric Hartman and Richard Kiley that put that together. And so that is a framework that we're looking at to assess our partnerships and assess our work on human rights and experiential learning.
And then looking at how we apply even the international, or not international, but the border work to local issues, and specifically to the issues we've faced. Last year, we had a vigil in a collaboration with local immigrant rights organizations at the ICE facility not too far from Dayton. And so I don't know if you'd like to speak more to that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, this is just to say that when it comes to the moral courage, they did migration and refugee work on the border, but we also have community engagement around refugee and migration issues in Dayton. Dayton has a Welcome Dayton part of the community, which has basically been established to ensure that migrants and refugees are welcomed in the community. And our center, with faculty who their primary area of research is around migration and refugee rights. We do a lot of work within the community to support the efforts of this sort of Welcome Dayton approach. Jared?
Yeah, I'll go through quickly, and not to take up too much time, to the first question about community engagement. I think this is a trend happening not just at UD, but also elsewhere, is looking internally, not just externally. And so we've seen a lot more classes that I personally been involved with and heard of that are thinking about, as we're engaging with projects, to do so in the local community. But we also have to be conscious of how we do that, as Rachel had mentioned, because if you're only there working for a month or for a semester, then that's not really building an equitable relationship and also not a sustainable relationship. But I think just to touch on that briefly, we all are aware of the crises around human trafficking, drug trafficking, food insecurity in Dayton, and we do have classes and organizations that are working on that. Last summer, I was able to participate in an internship program with an organization at UD called the Institute of Applied Creativity for Transformation, where we are engaging with local community members, and we are working with them. We're not acting like we're experts coming in and saying, "Oh, this is what you need," but we're working with them. They're saying, "No, this is what we're experiencing," and then so we're figuring out how we can help each other. To the second gentleman's, I don't know if there's a question in there, but I think the support is for all of us to do what we do is coming from people like Shelley and Kelly, who are allowing us to continue doing this work and giving us, the courage and even just the opportunities to do this. And having the support from within the institution has been really great. And even as you had mentioned, even me personally, support from my parents, both allowing me to be able to do this work and give me the opportunity and support to do that has been really instrumental. The engineering to human rights, and so I was one of the unusual ones that switched from engineering. I have many friends who are in engineering who are very aware of this. They're thinking of outside of the traditional norm of how can I apply my engineering to issues of environmental and social justice? And so that is prevalent all throughout the School of Engineering at UD. And so UD is, I won't speak on too much because Kelly has done a really great job of doing that, but they are really thinking outside the box about how do we, transcend those traditional engineering stereotypes, practices as well. With the build core, not to get burnt out, I think there's inherently some sacrifice in there. I mean, we're all missing classes to be here. We're missing assignments to be here. And so through all the work that we do, we're sacrificing. But also, we're building relationships. And so, I think one thing that we all need to try and work on is, how much time we're devoting to the work that we do on campus, but also being students and having personal lives and getting sleep. All of that stuff's really important, if no one knew. And there's a question about the programs of student investment, and so I think when you're designing these programs, there needs to be that initial investment from students, and it's not just, as we talk about going into communities and, working with them, this is the same scenario. You need to build these programs with students so that there is that student buy-in and investment. You're not just designing programs saying, oh, here's this awesome opportunity, now go participate in it. It's designing those programs with students to say, what kind of programs, opportunities would you like to participate in, and then think about how you can leverage that student investment with also the partnerships you're building in communities as well. And then just recognizing issues and challenges of diversity. UD does a really good job of recognizing that. We're starting to work on what that implementation looks like, and there's a plethora of programs that are really trying to bring that to the attention of students. Of course, we're seeing pushback. But that's societal pushback around white privilege and what that looks like. But UD is not alone in experiencing that, and so it's something that is happening from not just top down, but also bottom up, because students like us are recognizing that as well.
Yeah, and then I wanted to touch, Jared talked a little bit, few and proud burning out. That when that was raised in the question of projects, how do you make sure they are sustainable, especially what we were talking about before we came up here to talk about our experiences was we didn't really get involved and start making a difference on the campus or in the community until we were juniors. Because for the first 2 years, we were getting adjusted and figuring out classes, and then our on-campus jobs didn't start until we were older. And that gives us about 2 years to finally figure out what we want to do, make it happen, and then just hope when we leave, someone else cares about what we care about. So last semester, I was really frustrated, especially with no departments communicating, and the Student Government Associated wanted to start composting on campus. And I said, did you talk to the Hanley Sustainability Institute? They've been working on it for 8 years. And they go, no. And I was like, okay, so there's clearly this lack of communication between groups that are doing similar projects. So along with the Student Government Association, and on behalf of the Hanley Sustainability Institute, we started a Sustainability Leaders Council. And we reached out to different groups in campus ministry, the Human Rights Center, and all across the board, people that they were asking, why are we in here? Like, we're busy. Yes, and it's all undergraduate students. And it started because I really genuinely just asked my friends to be on it, because I was like, okay, I know people in all these groups and I know that they'll care about this, but then I get worried, what happens when I leave? What happens when then Jared and Rachel have come in, and Jared's been helping with the planning and Rachel's been representing the Human Rights Center, and what happens when we leave? And I think something that students don't think about is in that 2 years as an upperclassman, when we're really invested in our work and our projects, we're so focused on trying to gain all these experiences, being the ones to present at conferences, being the ones to take on projects and take on these meetings, because we feel like we have such a short time to build our CVs or resumes. And I think something that, while I'm getting ready to graduate in the spring, I've been thinking so much about giving those opportunities to underclassmen and shaping them so that when I leave and we all leave, the council doesn't die, that people don't lose that momentum. But I think as students, that's something that's hard, but taking on that mentorship aspect of within our jobs, in our clubs and programs, to give underclassmen those tools, because I think a lot of the time that's where the flame starts to dwindle between graduating and students that are still at the university.
Okay. So what didn't we answer? I think we didn't answer the question about reproductive rights. I don't know if we answered enough the question about Dayton engagement. From the Human Rights Center side, we do have a Dayton-based, Miami-based project specifically on human trafficking, because it's historically been such an issue for Dayton, being at the intersection of 70 and 75. And we do have other community-based, they're not so much rights-based projects, but they're, support for local Dayton community. I think there's more we could do. I think the Dayton community is more and more aware of the more rights-based and justice-based issues that it's facing, so I think there is more work to be done there. There's a lot on the sustainability side and sort of the just support for community generally. So on the reproductive rights question, it's of course an environment where that's a sensitive issue. I think there's a lot of work done at the University of Dayton on issues that are sensitive from a Catholic perspective. There's a lot of leadership within those who have Catholic social teaching as their primary area of expertise. For example, we have a chair on faith and contemporary culture. She has led a process of difficult conversations and taking on issues like reproductive rights in that context. But I certainly think it's an issue that we need to be doing and talking about more. But we do have, because of the Marianist tradition, we do have a relatively open tradition of working on challenging issues from a Catholic social justice perspective, which is, I don't know how much you know of the Marianist order, and we do, of course, have a Marianist sister here in our audience, if you'd like to know more. Yes, you want to say something?
I would just also say, and I think this
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, sometimes these issues end up being, so polarized and so polarizing that it's hard to get at them from that purely intersectional perspective, because then they sometimes get lost because you aren't actually addressing necessarily directly what some people would identify the issue as. So I think it's a great approach, but trying to get there sometimes is difficult in light of the fact that that's the kind of issue that has been highly politicized and polarized and plays a particular role in narratives around the church. I don't know if our Marianist sister, Leanne, would like to say anything. I'm certainly no expert since I am not Catholic nor Marianist. So I think the overall environment enables a lot of discussion, at least conversations to be had at the University of Dayton. There's been a lot of work around LGBTQ+ and having an LGBTQ+ coordinator at the university who helps the LGBTQ+ community at the university to really address the challenges they face. That's another issue that is fraught for a Catholic institution. Any other?
There was a couple things that I noticed. ABET, someone asked about ABET, which is our accreditation for School of Engineering. They haven't really cared about, I think they're all like, yeah, you have an Ethos Center, but they're so focused on the academic courses and what the academic courses in each department is getting to the learning outcomes. We do give academic credit, but it's a free elective, free engineering elective, and because it's an elective, then ABET's not going to look at it because they're looking at your required courses. Then the other piece I was going to mention too is we have pretty good retention in engineering actually, especially our minorities in engineering, I think because we do so much work in that area. And we have co-ops are super stressed to engineering students, and a lot of the students that end up coming to do an ethos immersion, which I would say is roughly 60 students a year, are the ones that are like, I'm not sure I want to go back to my co-op. So a lot of students realize, I want more than this, or I want something different. And that's probably because they're getting it through their humanities courses or through other experiences that our students can get on campus where they're realizing there's so much more that ties into engineering. And I'm thrilled when they come to us and they want to do that, because that's a really ripe space, if you will, to talk to them about human rights and to bring that pedagogy and content to them and to really stretch them.
So I think that's it. We're at time. Thank you all so much for sharing this with us. We really appreciate it. And thank you to the panel.